The Harlem Renaissance was a defining moment in American cultural history, particularly in the development of African American literature. Spanning the 1920s and early 1930s, this cultural movement emerged from the Harlem neighborhood in New York City and represented a flourishing of black artistic expression across various mediums, including literature, music, visual arts, and performance. The literature of the Harlem Renaissance not only reflected the complexities of black life in America but also challenged and reshaped societal views on race, identity, and the American experience. The Harlem Renaissance emerged out of a complex interplay of social, political, and cultural forces. The Great Migration, during which millions of African Americans moved from the rural South to the urban North in search of better economic opportunities and to escape Jim Crow segregation, set the stage for the movement. Harlem, a neighborhood in Upper Manhattan, became a cultural epicenter for these migrants, attracting a diverse community of artists, intellectuals, and activists. The end of World War I in 1918 also played a critical role in fostering the conditions for the Harlem Renaissance. The war had exposed many African American soldiers to different cultures and ideas, particularly in Europe, where racial segregation was less rigid than in the United States. Returning home, these soldiers and others were less willing to accept the racial status quo. This period also coincided with the broader American Jazz Age, a time of economic prosperity, cultural experimentation, and a loosening of social norms. One of the central themes in Harlem Renaissance literature was the exploration of African American identity. Writers like Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Claude McKay delved into the complexities of black life, expressing pride in their heritage while also grappling with the challenges of racial discrimination and segregation. Langston Hughes, often referred to as the poet laureate of the Harlem Renaissance, was particularly influential in articulating the experiences of everyday black Americans. In his poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers, Hughes traces the lineage of black people back to the ancient civilizations of Africa, connecting their struggles in America to a broader historical context. This theme of reclaiming African heritage was a powerful counter-narrative to the dominant racist ideologies of the time, which sought to dehumanize black people and erase their contributions to history. Zora Neale Hurston, another key figure, focused on the lives of African Americans in the rural South, particularly black women. Her novel Their Eyes Were Watching God is a seminal work that explores themes of love, independence, and the search for identity through the lens of its protagonist, Janie Crawford. Hurston's use of African American vernacular and folklore was groundbreaking, as it celebrated the richness of black culture and rejected the notion that it was inferior to white culture. The Harlem Renaissance was also marked by a strong sense of racial pride and a defiance against the pervasive racism of the era. Claude McKay's poem, If We Must Die, is emblematic of this spirit. Written in response to the race riots of 1919, the poem is a call to arms, urging black people to resist oppression with dignity and courage. McKay's work often highlighted the injustices faced by African Americans, while also celebrating their resilience and strength. Similarly, in his essay, The New Negro, Alan Locke, a prominent philosopher and intellectual of the Harlem Renaissance, articulated the vision of a new black identity that was assertive, self-confident, and unapologetic. Locke argued that African Americans should embrace the cultural heritage and demand equal rights, challenging the stereotypes and prejudices that had long defined their existence in America. The literature of the Harlem Renaissance was deeply intertwined with the political movements of the time. Many writers saw their work as a form of social activism, using their art to challenge the status quo and advocate for civil rights. William Edward Burgard Du Bois, a leading intellectual of the era, was a proponent of this approach, arguing that art should serve a higher purpose and contribute to the advancement of the race. Du Bois was critical of works that he felt did not align with this vision, leading to debates within the Harlem Renaissance community about the role of art in social change. On the other hand, some writers, like Hurston, resisted the notion that art should be primarily political. Hurston believed in the intrinsic value of art and culture, and her works often focused on the everyday lives of black people rather than overt political themes. This tension between art and politics was a defining feature of the Harlem Renaissance and reflected broader debates within the African American community about the best path to achieving equality and justice. The impact of Harlem Renaissance literature was profound and far-reaching, influencing not only subsequent generations of African American writers but also the broader American literary canon. The Harlem Renaissance laid the foundation for modern African American literature, setting the stage for the works of later writers like Richard Wright, Ralph Ellison, James Baldwin, and Toni Morrison. These writers built on the themes and styles developed during the Harlem Renaissance, exploring the complexities of Black identity, the legacy of slavery, and the ongoing struggle for civil rights. Richard Wright's Native Son, for example, drew on the social realism of Harlem Renaissance writers like Mackay to depict the harsh realities of Black life in America. Similarly, Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man explored the psychological impact of racism, building on the introspective and identity-focused narratives of Harlem Renaissance literature. Toni Morrison, one of the most celebrated African American writers of the 20th century, also acknowledged the influence of the Harlem Renaissance on her work. In novels like Beloved and Song of Solomon, Morrison delved into the complexities of Black life, history, and memory, themes that were central to the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance also had a significant impact on the broader American literary landscape. It challenged the dominance of white, Eurocentric narratives and introduced a diverse array of voices and perspectives into American literature. This contributed to a more inclusive and representative literary canon, paving the way for the multiculturalism that characterizes contemporary American literature. The Harlem Renaissance also helped to elevate the status of African American culture within American society. Jazz, blues, and other forms of Black music, which were central to the Harlem Renaissance, gained mainstream popularity and became integral to American cultural identity. The movement also contributed to a greater appreciation of African American art, with artists like Aaron Douglas and Jacob Lawrence gaining recognition for their work. The Harlem Renaissance was not just a cultural movement but also a political one. The literature and art of the era played a crucial role in shaping the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. The themes of racial pride, defiance, and social justice that were central to Harlem Renaissance literature resonated with the activists of the civil rights era and helped to inspire their efforts. Moreover, the Harlem Renaissance challenged the prevailing racial stereotypes and prejudices of the time. By showcasing the richness and diversity of African American culture, the movement helped to combat the dehumanizing narratives that had long been used to justify racism and segregation. This shift in cultural perceptions contributed to the gradual erosion of institutionalized racism in America, even if the progress was slow and uneven. The impact of the Harlem Renaissance was not limited to the United States. It also had a significant influence on Black intellectuals and artists in other parts of the world, particularly in the Caribbean and Africa. The movement helped to inspire the Negritude movement in Francophone Africa and the Caribbean, which sought to reclaim and celebrate Black culture and identity in the face of colonialism. Writers like Aimé Césaire and Léopold Sédar Senghor, who were key figures in the Negritude movement, were influenced by the works of Harlem Renaissance writers. The themes of racial pride and cultural reclamation that were central to the Harlem Renaissance resonated with their own experiences of colonial oppression, and they adapted these ideas to their own contexts. The Harlem Renaissance was a transformative period in American cultural history, and its literature played a crucial role in shaping the African American identity, challenging racial stereotypes, and influencing broader social and political movements. The themes and styles developed during the Harlem Renaissance continue to resonate in contemporary literature, and the movement's impact can be seen in the works of later African American writers, as well as in the broader American cultural landscape. The Harlem Renaissance was not just a cultural movement but a pivotal moment in the struggle for racial equality and justice in America. By asserting the value and richness of African American culture, the writers of the Harlem Renaissance helped to lay the groundwork for the civil rights movement and contributed to the ongoing fight for equality and justice in the United States and beyond.